Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us here again at KNZC, KGLN, and the Internet and podcasting. We appreciate you showing up again and letting us invade your ears. So appreciate it. It's Rick Wagner. And we're on 1100 and 92.7. Say nothing about 980 and 101.3 for KGLN and other places. So we appreciate your listenership, as I said. I want to talk a little bit about money, as you might be able to tell. It seems to be something that our people in Congress don't quite understand. And it's unfortunately seems to be something that our president and the Treasury Secretary don't understand, which is a little alarming. It's not alarming if you know Joe. I mean, having you understand anything probably it would be a surprise. But some of the stuff they're coming up with now in terms of what's happening to our economy, more than just the stuff that we're seeing right away, is a little. It's more than a little disturbing. And so I wanted to talk about that. I got a couple of, I did little calculations here I thought we'd talk about. Now, as you know, the Consumer Price Index came in, as they like to say, a little hot on Wednesday. And we'll be seeing the Producer Price Index. I haven't looked at that, but I mean, that comes in right afterwards. What we're getting is, they expected it to be about 2.75%, and it came in about 3.5%. Significant. If you're Joe, that's President Joe to us, you think, apparently from the speeches he gave, like he gave one a month ago, that if inflation is less from month to month, that somehow means prices are going down. Remember he was saying, inflation's going down and these people aren't lowering their prices. Now, part of that is just the usual attempt to vilify producers, business people, things like that, and misdirect the attention from people who are suffering from the people that are doing it to someone else. So we get that. But I honestly think he doesn't understand it. And as we've mentioned before, inflation is cumulative. So if we say inflation went up 3.5% this month, that is 3.5% particularly. Also look at it from month to month. So it's not going down. It's increasing. All we're doing right now is trying to decrease the rate of increase. I know it's bizarre to sound it, but that's really what we're doing. First, we have to decrease the rate of increase, hopefully flatten it out, and then it's hard. I was going to say impossible. It's not impossible. It's very difficult to de-inflate the economy without having some major disruption in it. Disinflation is not a good thing for the rest of the economy. So what you get is if you can just control the inflationary step up, then you hope that you can get the economy running around and going and producing something so that it catches up to the prices and what people are trying to pay. And you can't just do that by mandating minimum wages. As a matter of fact, you make it worse. Because as we know here, and if you ever see Janet yelling out, you might mention it to her. If you continuously place money into the system without increasing production, goods and services and sales, then you're just making more of inflation. You're just throwing more money in there, printing it, putting it in the computers, whatever you're doing. So right now, there's a battle going on between the administration and the Fed. The Federal Reserve really only has one major tool, and that is the money supply. And they try and decrease the money supply by increasing the interest rate so that people are borrowing less. That should decrease the amount in circulation. But that can't work if the administration is continuing to borrow and print money and distribute it. It also can't work if you get rid of debt. And see, they've tried to sell this college debt thing that Joe keeps trying to buy votes with by saying, well, it's debt. We're just forgiving debt. Okay. But what happens to that? Because at one point, real money was involved in accumulating that debt. Does that just go away? Of course not. if you're running a business like many of you are out there, or astute in how you run a business like many of you out there, you realize that if somebody owes you money that you lent them, that's sort of like an accounts receivable, isn't it? It's money that you have on that side of the ledger. It's supposed to be coming in at some point. If you take that off the ledger, it stays on debt. So it increases the debt because it's no longer an accounts receivable. It's no longer something that someone's going to pay. So it becomes debt because you did spend the money. Trust me, all these colleges got their money for whatever ridiculous degree most of these people were trying to get, and they could care less if they can pay them back because it's guaranteed by the government. The government is responsible for it. And the government the federal government took over all of this student loan stuff under Obama. Before you were able to have some private providers and stuff like that. And not anymore. The government owns all of it. So Joe trying to do this, and I calculated, and I listened to several people calculate, the amount this is actually going to cost on the debt side. And it's anywhere from $750 to probably $900 million that we're going to be forgiving that will add to money that we don't have. Now, the national debt, which everyone seems to talk about, but no one really knows what to do about it. Because what to do about it's pretty easy. Stop spending money. Don't spend more than you make. I thought I'd give you a couple of quick statistics here that I accumulated. It says the United States is projected to pay $870 billion in interest on the debt this year. Next year, we're expected to pay $951 billion in interest in 2025. And by 2034, at this rate of increase of running the debt up, which is, almost $1 trillion every 100 days right now, then we will owe a interest payment in 2034 for that year of $1.6 trillion. Over the next 10 years, these interest payments are going to add up to about $12.4 trillion. Now, this surpasses expenditures on all the major budget categories, including defense and Medicare. Now, that is unsustainable. And so I looked at the Defense Department, just by itself. And the request for the Defense Department for fiscal year 2025, next year, is $849 billion, $849.8, just to put a point on it. And if you compare this to the interest payments on the national debt for this year, they're estimated to be $870 billion. So the amount we pay in interest on the national debt this year is, what, 21, a little less, I guess, $20.2 billion more than we've scheduled for the Department of Defense to have in their budget to defend the country and do everything we're supposed to next year. What do you think about that? I don't think anybody 15 years ago, when we were talking about the national debt and it was bad then, thought it would get to that point. But those are some interesting statistics, aren't they? I mean, just think about it. We're going to spend, $20.8 billion more on just paying the interest on the debt. We're not paying the debt down, just paying the interest on the debt that we're allocating for national defense for the next year. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but that doesn't seem very safe. And I don't think the world feels very safe right now. So I would like it if Joe would quit trying to buy votes by forgiving people's debt to the government and spending money on ridiculous things. Just saying. All right, we're back, everybody. Thanks for standing by. I appreciate that. For those of you on the podcast that don't hear our bumper music or you hear different bumper music, I had to play the theme from Miami Vice because occasionally I want to take a trip back to the 80s when we had an economy that actually made sense and people were making money. And Reagan was president. Oh, yeah. That's what happened. Now, we had a rough part there in the beginning because we had to straighten out with what Jimmy Carter had done. Jimmy Carter, terrible president, probably a nice guy, Right now, really terrible president, not even close to being a nice guy. So, I mean, we still end up in the same kind of spot, except that in this situation, what we have is a government that appears to be run by people we don't see. It's sort of the shadow government, except the shadows seem to have all the power. I thought shadows weren't supposed to be able to do things like that, but they can. Just look at what's happening now. Anybody that thinks that deranged person wandering aimlessly around and shuffling on the White House lawn is making a bunch of these decisions really isn't paying attention, or they'll watch a lot of MSNBC. In either case, it's not healthy. So it would be nice to know really what's going on. Anyway, I thought I would touch a little bit more on economics since we had interesting stuff happening this week. As you know, and we mentioned, I think that the CPI came in a little hot, as they say. And so I thought, in addition to that, and I mentioned our budget deficit and how much it's going up, and then how much our debt is. We talked about that. Let's talk about something else that's robbing you. And that, of course, is the inflationary spiral. You know this innately, but you have to focus on it to see how bad it's really been. And as I said before, Joe seemed not understand it. He thinks when the rate of increase is going down, that somehow inflation is going down. That's just not true. I mean, as I explained to somebody once, I said, no, it's like if the temperature is going up 2 degrees every day, and then it starts going up 1 degree every day, it's not going down. It's just slowing down. It's increase. And we don't want that. Now, we did a little back-of-the-envelope calculations, and it looks to me like the dollars that you've had since, let's see, Joe, when he came into office in 2020, if you've had a dollar then, it's worth about 19.2% less than it was when he came into office. Now, we say worth in terms of what we mean by purchasing power, because the price of everything's gone up, so you need more of those dollars to purchase it. And it's still moving. So you can save all the money you want if government actions are reaching in with, and this time, an invisible hand that's a bad invisible hand, is reaching in and adjusting the value of your IRA or whatever you're doing down, because that's what's happening. And it will get worse with that debt, because more and more of the government is going to have to be financed. And the financing cost is part of that debt. And right now, a lot of what's being sold is being sold to China. And China has been slowing down on their purchases of our debt. And because we have so much of it, and because of our debt being, a substantial amount more than our yearly GDP, gross domestic product, everything we make and sell, it seems a little more risky. So if you're more risky when you're loaning money to somebody, if it's more risky, what do? You ask for more interest. You give the money away at a higher rate of return. It's kind of happening with us now. It's certainly going to start happening if it looks like we're really getting into the tank. And, $1 trillion every 100 days of borrowing is not looking good. And then, as we saw this week, and we mentioned, we have Joe trying to buy votes by having you pay for other people's student loans. Now, some of you may be getting forgiven on your student loans. I don't know, but most people are not. A lot of people worked hard to pay off their student loans. Now, it took me like 8 years to pay off my student loans, and I didn't even have that much. Now, people have much more than that in student loans, and they don't have the degrees to get a job that's going to pay anything off. Piece of paper they have is good for making a paper airplane out of, and maybe not even that. Something needs to be interjected into that calculation of what a good risk it is. See, when anybody else loans money, there's a risk assigned to it. Have you paid money back before? Do you have an income that's going to make the payment back? If you go to buy a car, something like that, you finance something, those are all the things that get asked about you. You go to get a student loan, which, by the way, as I mentioned last time, that the Obama administration put all into the federal government in, I don't want to say 2012, something like that. Maybe it was a little later than that. And So now it's all federal government financing. Before, they just guaranteed the loans. For some of them, they had some of them that came directly from them, and they guaranteed them for private lenders. Now they're all through the government. When that happens, you're paying for it. And the reason is, as I say, no one assigns risk to the loans. You can buy a tremendous amount, borrow, or be given, I should say, a tremendous amount of money, give to a perfectly useless university to get a pointless degree, and no one will say one peep about your ability to repay it based on your credit history or based on what you're going to be doing. The crazy thing about that is, who does that in real life? Your life. Because, see, there's real life and there's government life, apparently. In real life, there's no way on the planet you would do something like that without getting some kind of idea about how trustworthy somebody was and whether or not they're going to pay it back and whether or not they're doing something that's going to make a difference to them financially so that they can pay it back. No one does that calculation. As I've said many times before, the problem is the people receiving the money are in the middle of the mix with the people who are loaning the money. You know, the universities and the federal government seem to be arm in arm strolling down the yellow brick road. And the universities get paid whether you pay it back or not. Well, not you, but rather the person borrowing it pays it back or not. And whether the degree that they're giving you ever gets completed or it's in something that anybody looking on from the outside that has an IQ over 45 would realize that you're not going to make any money with it. Nobody does that. Just think about that for a minute. Think about all the money. I mean, we're going to forgive probably by the time they're paying this last bunch off. I think I heard an estimate of over $700, maybe $800 billion when you figure interest payments that people owe. And remember, it's not loan forgiveness. It simply goes to the government side of debt. And who pays the government's debt? Gee, I don't know. I mean, do we go to the government store and buy, U.S. government cars or U.S. government bread or anything? No, we don't. The government doesn't produce anything like that. It just takes money. So you're paying it straight out taxes one way or another. This sleight of hand these people try and pull in Washington about saying that it's loan forgiveness, it is essentially loan payback by other people. And it's clear to anybody that actually pays their own bills, which makes you wonder what people in some of these governmental jobs do, because they don't appear to understand paying their own bills. So you got to wake up to that. I'm hoping people will wake up to that in this next election, because he's trying to buy votes. He doesn't care about these people. I mean, what he's trying to do is trying to get people to make sure they vote for him because he's giving them something. And this has been the whole problem with our economy for the last 3 years, is enormous giveaway after giveaway, and at the same time doing things that squeeze down productivity in the name of climate change or regulation or just idiocy. That's like a pincher movement in a wartime kind of thing. 2 columns coming out, kind of getting you from both sides. That's what that's like. Or, in a better one, the hammer and the anvil, as they like to talk about in the, in military tactician talk, which is, that you have a fairly static, powerful force on one side and a highly mobile, powerful force on the other, and it slams one into the other thing. And that's happening to you. And every month, it gets a little worse. Now, we are fortunate in a way, and I know it doesn't feel like fortunate, that some of this is obvious very quickly because it has hit food and fuel so much faster. Now remember that in some of these calculations on inflation, they don't calculate fuel costs or food into them. That's an interesting way to go, isn't it? Well, we changed some of the ways we calculate inflation and the consumer price index, really, when they were looking at Social Security, even under Reagan, where what was happening was that the cost of living was oscillating around so much the first couple of years that Reagan came into office after Carter, that they decided to remove the most volatile elements from it. Because what would happen was it would require them to raise Social Security so much, and then they were trying to get it to come down because they didn't want to raise Social Security and then try and lower it. So the whole thing is just a continuing issue we have to be aware of. All right, everybody, here we are back in our third segment. Woo, time flies, doesn't it? I know I feel like I've been a little bit of a wet blanket with all of this stuff, but the world is a wet blanket right now, so we just have to realize that. Got to get the dryer turned on, and the dryer turned on is hopefully during this next election. So one thing I wanted to talk about was Israel and Iran. Now, you've been hearing endless analysis of it, but it's usually the same stuff repeated over and over again. The only experts that I really listen to is the one on Fox, is General Keane. I think he's really got his act together. A lot of them, I don't know where they're going. And I can't tell because so often the hosts lecture them and just ask them to agree with them. So you don't learn a whole lot. So what I'd done, over the last 3 weeks, I had built a artificial intelligence model because I like that kind of stuff. And those of you that know, the show's been out a really long time, and from the beginning, I've tried to have various things on the internet to track down stories and things that I wouldn't necessarily have time to find. And so I've kind of refined that. I'm certainly no computer geek, but I've refined on how to do that. And when AI came out, I thought, well, I think you could build a program there that will for the stories and put them together, and even maybe have some predictive analysis in terms of what, the consensus on certain things are. And that would help, keep the listeners on various things in a little more concise manner. And as we know, Iran has decided to inflict an attack of some sort on Israel. No one's quite sure what it is. We have now did another pivot. Is it possible for Biden to pivot? I don't think so. That would involve him moving fairly quickly in on one foot. But the administration has done a pivot, and now they're openly supporting Israel after sort of, jumping in their way of the war against Hamas the week before. And that's because the United States has actionable intelligence that, yes, Iran is going to do something, and we don't want to be looking like we're on their side somehow, or that we're trying to get Israel not to do anything, because then it makes us look even worse than we already look. And that's a good question. I mean, is this moving around all over the place? Now we're doing this, now we're doing that, all of them inconsistent with any kind of policy? I mean, can anybody really lay out the United States policy vis-a-vis Israel right now with any kind of coherence? What you hear from the spokespeople, Jake Sullivan in particular, is sort of a imbecilic and incoherent rambling about sort of pseudonyms, referring to our policy, it's all euphemisms, really. They don't really say anything. What they're really saying is our policy is to try and do something that will win us votes from people who like Israel and not cause us to lose votes from people who hate Israel. And we know where most of those are. There's a lot of this policy that's being run out of Dearborn, Michigan. You hear that mentioned a few times, but it's kind of true. There is a large population around Dearborn in that area that is affiliated with people who support the liberation of Palestine, assuming Palestine was ever a country, which it wasn't, and some of the from the river to the sea crowd, a lot of them there. Now, why are they there? Well, I wondered about myself. Is that Dearborn, Michigan? How does Michigan get so many people? Well, apparently, when the auto industry was still going, before we managed to destroy that in the United States to all functional purposes, there was a lot of jobs that were available that paid pretty well. And word got out to a lot of the people coming in from the Middle East that they could go to Detroit or Dearborn, which is very close, also had some factories, and get good jobs. And like is often the case, they tell everybody where they're from, and it's kind of like their secret to say, really good jobs here, you guys need to come. And then, of course, once they were here, because of our immigration policies, if you can call it a policy, they brought family members, cousins, second cousins, people that they barely knew. And everybody came over and showed up in Michigan around this place. Now, of course, some of that area is on hard times since a lot of the auto manufacturing has moved on. But nevertheless, there's a high concentration there. And it's not like it's 20 million people. But you see, Joe knows that he supposedly won Michigan by just a few thousand votes. Now, we don't know exactly what was going on there, but nevertheless, he knows that if he loses those people, he could lose the state. So it all sort of balances on this relatively small group of people in Michigan. Because as the people in the Biden campaign see it, this is a close election where 2 or 3 pivotal points are going to decide it. And we know from looking at the last election for president that what was around 40,000 votes scattered different places caused the victory to go to Biden. And we wonder about some of those. It's hard to tell right now, isn't it? This is why this weird focus on this, and this is why they can't get a coherent policy, because we've always had a strong relationship with Israel, and there are a fair amount of people in the Democrat Party, not the Progressive Party, but the Democrat Party, that still support Israel. But there is an extremely loud group of Ilhan Omars and Tlaib and Cori Bushes and all those folks that are going to do anything that seems to harm America's prestige or their allies. So it's been a strange time in the Democrat Party. It seems to be hijacked by the inmates of the asylum. It's clearly been hijacked by the inmates of the asylum. And so it's very difficult for someone to try and triangulate, in the old terms of Clinton, what you're supposed to do within your own party structure to try and keep people on board. There's a lot of these folks that are pro-Palestine liberation, such as it is, are withholding their vote from Joe. They showed it during the primary, and they keep telling them they're going to do it. I don't know about that. My feeling is that most of those people are so anti-Trump, for various reasons, that it's going to be hard for them not to vote against Trump by voting for Biden. I mean, and that's what the whole Biden campaign is hoping for anyway, isn't it? Is that to win by people who are voting against Trump. Have you heard much of what old Joe's talked about in his speeches and some of his surrogates? Has it really been programmatic things that you want to hear about? This is what we're going to do. This is going to make your life better, this and that. No, the vast majority of it is just trying to scare you to death of Donald Trump, which is really strange since Donald Trump has already been president once. We know what he did, and we know what Joe did. You wouldn't think it'd even be a close call. The fact that it is, or appears to be, is a very strange thing. I also noticed that in a couple of the states, the swing states, the media has been saying, oh, the polls are tightening. I don't think the polls are tightening. First of all, Trump always underperforms in the polling, but overperforms on the election. That's because most of the people doing the polling are such that Trump supporters don't trust them to tell them anything. So that's one thing. The second thing is they always try and get it together and make it close to make sure that they turn voters out, to say, make it feel like your vote counts. And your vote does count. Your vote as a Republican or an independent or a libertarian, for that matter, counts a lot, because a sizable percentage has to be obtained by Trump if we're going to overcome some of the inconsistencies that seem to arise in the vote counting process. So they're going to try to tighten the polls up so it makes it look like that they can turn their base out. They got real problems. Trump has been picking up 5 of the 6 main swing states. He was ahead of Biden this week, and in one of them he's tied. It's Wisconsin. He's tied with him. I think it's like 46-46. And that's not really good at all. It's really making the media look like they've been slapped with a hand and a glove of cold water every time they say that. They can't believe it. So trying to get this policy, to get this what we would think would be a relatively small number of votes is very important to them because of where they're at. In a swing state with a sizable electoral college votes. So, we see that. So what's going to happen, as I started out with, we think is going to happen between Iran and Israel? Well, always remember here that it's not like they're their borders. I mean, Israel's got enough enemies. Matter of fact, all their borders are surrounded by enemies. And either direct enemies, as in the nation states, or a couple of nation states hosting terrorists sponsored by Iran right on the border of Israel. So that's a different kind of warfare. It's, of course, obvious asymmetrical warfare. Iran doesn't really have a military that could match Israel one-on-one. They just don't. The Revolutionary Guard and all those characters, no, they're just not organized enough. They have some decent weaponry here and there. They've really invested a lot into their missile weapon systems and drones. But in terms of come out, all out, we're going to take this land that involves actual fighting for every inch of the way, they're not going to be able to do it. Plus, they have to go through Iraq to get to them. Or I guess they could sail around out of the Mediterranean. I don't think that's going to happen. They're certainly not going to parachute in there. So they need to fight by proxy for the most part, and a couple other ways. So I went through and looked at some of the possible scenarios, and I thought they were kind of interesting. The most likely scenario, and remember, these are just guesses that you can come up with by looking at at actual experts and what they think is most likely to happen, and we never know if that's true or not, but is through Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is probably the most potent proxy in the region, and that is located in Lebanon. They are in a very strategic place there, right along the border of Israel. And they could easily involve sudden and intense rocket fire to target like these northern Israeli cities, some of the military bases up there, and critical infrastructure. Yeah. That would inflict immediate damage, and here's the nice thing. It's not direct Iranian involvement. For all their bellicose talking all the time, they don't really want to be held accountable for this. They keep denying that they're behind all these things. Everybody on the planet knows that they're behind all this stuff, but they always want plausible deniability. This would give them quite a bit of that. Plus, the Israel ground forces are kind of at the other end of Israel. So by doing this, you get to have a distraction from the war in the south, which is going to have to cause them to send resources to the north. And I'm certain it will involve a great deal of drone attacks and probably Iranian-supplied missiles. Remember that Israel has some of the most potent anti-missile defenses out there. Iron Dome, Slinger, or David's Sling, as I like to call it. And they have a great chance at it, but there's two problems with that. One is that it's really expensive. These guys can shoot missiles and drones that are harder to shoot down in any way, that are much cheaper, but very destructive, over into Israel. But targeting them and knocking them out involves ordnance that is tremendously more expensive than what they're shooting down. I mean, that's just economics. Remember, the old Roman saying about war burns gold. And it does. Never changed. So that kind of thing can be very effective. The other part is that by doing it this way, they can retreat back across the Lebanon border and create a real problem if Israel wants to strike back. And Israel probably would strike back, and then there'd be another international incident, and we had all these kinds of things going on. And it still would protect Iran from being directly involved. The other thing they could do is engage kind of all of their proxies at the same time. If they have a coordinated attack between some in Hezbollah, remaining forces of Hamas, the Houthis, those guys that are in the Red Sea shooting rockets at things like that, and they could run, missile attacks, drone attacks, sabotage things, all that kind of stuff they do at the same time. And there's some other ones out there called the Islamic Jihad. And in Syria, they have the Shia militias. So there's a lot of different ways they could do it. And it doesn't take too many of them to start drawing manpower away from where they're actually working in southern Israel and thinking about going into Rafah. So that creates a multi-front attack on them. While it's not a true warfare, it'll certainly act that way, especially if they cross the border with some more terrorist acts like they did on October 7th, and then rain missiles down randomly places and try and pull apart their defensive structure. Remember, Israel's not that big, and their army is, while very effective, is not that numerous. They have pretty much everybody in it they can, and it can only be so many places. So by doing that, they can draw the sting from anything that might happen in Rafah, punish Israel, and still keep Iran's hands theoretically clean. We know they're not. That seems to me to be a very possible scenario. Both of those seem like a possible scenario. And the other piece that you throw in here that seems to be something that many people agree on is that all of this will probably involve some cyber warfare too. We kind of discount that anymore, but it's become very effective. Too much of the communications and even some of the defense systems are tied to things like geopositioning satellites, the computer systems that they use for everything from running the water to directing power in the cities, all these kinds of things. And so by attacking those kinds of infrastructure pieces, they can seriously interfere with the ability to respond militarily. And if that comes at the same time as everything else, well, you can see what kind of problem that can be, especially if they're able to inflict real problems through cyber warfare on civilian populations, like, turning off the water or destroying the internet infrastructure, things like that would cause a lot of disruption. I have no doubt that's going to happen. They've been building up their cyber warfare contingent for quite some time. They're learning from the Russians. The Russians are experts at cyber warfare. And the Chinese have been doing quite a bit of it, but the Russians have been at it for a while and, know how to take things down. Anything that man can build to protect himself can eventually be figured out and defeated. How many firewalls and antivirus and all that stuff we put up, there's as many people or maybe more working on figuring out ways around it. So one of the things you have to do is harden those facilities, obviously, to keep these things out. And the other thing, you have to make them redundant so that you're able to fall back on something else if those go down. And I worry about that. There is a lot of this country and a lot of, the same thing in Israel, certainly Europe too, where we have forgotten how much we live through internet, Wi-Fi, global positioning, all that kind of stuff. And how disruptive it would be, not just to our ability to sit and scroll through our phones and read them when we're bored, but ability to get information, ability to communicate, in some instances find out where we are, and things we're quite used to. It's interesting how adaptable human nature is. I mean, that's one of the things that's good about human nature is we're very adaptable. On the other hand, when we get adapted to something and the rug gets pulled out from under us, that can create a lot of problems. And something that could have happened 25 years ago, where there was the internet, such as it was, would be taken down, versus what happens now, is amazingly large. And you wonder, why can't we get along without it now? I mean, it makes it better or easier. It's because we've gotten rid of so many things that we don't feel like we need anymore because we have all of this electronic stuff. And just to give you an example, you're out. You stop to get gas, and you lay your phone on the back of the car and gas it up. Now, this has never happened to me, of course. And as you get back in the car and drive off, you realize, oh, my gosh, I left the phone. So you back your car up, and you hear a little sound. You're not sure what it is. You get out, and you see that you backed over your phone. You don't have a phone. So you need to get a hold of somebody, perhaps, as we all do. We feel like we have to be in constant communication. And you look around for a payphone. Are there any payphones? No, there's not. You're not going to find payphones. That's the perfect example of what we're talking about. There's no redundancy. If your phone isn't working or you've lost it, and no one will let you use theirs in that scenario, how are you going to call anybody? I mean, it used to be that there were pay phones on pretty much every corner, or you could drive to one or walk to one or something. Not now. That kind of redundancy isn't existing. It's not the only system that's happened to. People aren't going to maintain a redundant system because it's not cost effective. But at the same time, for defense purposes and for communication purposes, we got to have something. But we really don't. And because of that, it's easy to have people just stand around slack-jawed and not know what to do. I mean, what do you do? Just drive off? What if you have to call somebody? What if you need something? You don't have a phone. You ask strangers to use theirs? Maybe you could drive to like a law enforcement agency and see if they'd let you call somebody. But it certainly wouldn't be anything like it was before, and it would blow things up for you in terms of what you're doing. So think about how that would work as a distraction, while at the same time there was some sort of missile invasion going on the border or something, and you see what could happen in Israel. Heck, it could happen here. We see all of these movies that have EMPs, electromagnetic pulse, which knocks out all the electronics and so forth. Geez, you don't even have to get anything that big. You just have to knock out some power a few places that have the routers go down, the servers go down, disrupt that kind of service, and you can paralyze a whole area. My guess is you can paralyze, tens of millions of people by knocking out just a few power stations. Because we won't build any more power stations because we want everything to be electric, but we don't want to build any more power stations. So our grid is pretty easily attacked, either through cyber warfare, by getting in the computers and screwing with them, or just by direct intervention with some sort of explosives or mechanical attack. Just something to think about. It's something to think about in your own life there, guys, in terms of what if you're prepping for anything, is redundancy. Most important things that you have should have a fallback system. Doesn't have to be as good as the first one, but it has to be something. We'll be back next week.